Hey, students, I just wanted to take a brief moment to talk about um, a handy tip in using VS Code, especially as we're developing our API models. One of the things that's going to happen is there's lots of moving parts happening at this point. We've got um, an API connecting to a services file, running a SQL query, and then returning results. Sometimes it's not clear exactly where the errors are going to come up. So one of the things we want to do is we want to be able to focus on kind of breaking down the code, where it's running, how it's running, the results, and making sure that we're getting exactly what we're expecting at each point in the process. And really, we want to make sure that we're fixing errors efficiently, as opposed to just getting our code to run and ensuring that it runs, and then just trying a bunch of stuff over and over again. And so the simplest thing to do is once we start with VS Code, we've installed the Python app, and you can see we've got our run.py file here. We've got several of our other um, uh, uh, modules here. And one of the modules, routes, for instance. What I've got over on the right-hand side is user's route, and we can see when we ran that, we got some good results, and that was all fine. But sometimes it's helpful to kind of actually see what's happening, and so we can actually kind of trace through our results to make sure we know where things are happening. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to go into and pick our run.py file, and because this is where we're going to start our test from, right? And notice we're going to run our app on port 5000, which we have over here. Perfect. And if we go up and select this button here, when we click that little down arrow, it gives us a few different options. It gives us a run Python file, which is a typical thing we do. We typically see just a play button there. You notice we get this play button with a little bug on it that says we can debug. And so we're going to go ahead and debug our Python file. Now, I notice there's a little bit of work being done here by VS Code. And then we get the standard kind of startup that we see in all the other, even when we're running code. It says here the debugger is active, and we have the debugger pin set. And if we just run our code over here on the browser and we search for users, we notice we've gotten the request on our local IP address 127.0.0.1, and we've got our users, and we can do other things over here like movies, and there we get the list of all our movies. So two things, we can see in our console over here that we've actually gotten the request, that it was a GET request to this endpoint, and that we're getting the results and the results that are returned here in our browser. Now we can use Postman, we can use our own tests, whatever we'd like, but primarily I'm just using this as an example here. Now we'll notice that what if we had a challenge in our movies where it wasn't quite returning correctly? Well, we can go over to our routes file, and we can look for our routes. Let's say we're going to try to get a specific user. Well, the route for getting a specific user is defined here, users, and then we get some kind of integer with the user ID. That's a put, actually, so we'll want the user IDs of the gets. So here we go. Actually got the right one here. And we'll notice we've got just a few kind of steps here in our code. Very simple kind of way to go. What we can do is we can, to the right of the line numbers, we can click this little red button that says add a breakpoint. And when that red button turns bright red, then that says we've added a breakpoint. When we click it off, then it will stop there. Now what this means is when we go ahead and run our program, that it's actually going to stop at that point, and it's going to allow us to do a little bit of analysis, or a little bit of determining what exactly the environment looks like. So let's go ahead and see if we can get a user out of our list. We're going to get all the users first. Whoops. If we use the correct. Okay, here's all the users. Let's just pick one, ID 17. So let's look for user 17. And you'll notice that when we select user 17, we've gotten to the correct route, and we've stopped at our breakpoint. Now, our breakpoint just says that we have that we are currently running the program at this point, but we've kind of paused for a second, and we get to see exactly the state of our application at this point. If we go over to the left-hand bar over here, we'll notice that there's a couple of things happening here. We have our local variables. So the only local variable, right, is user ID. It's a parameter that was sent in, and we can see that that value is 17, which is what we expected. We can also just hover over the value, and notice when we hover over it, we can see that 17 is the value. That's fantastic. The other thing we see is we've got a get user by ID is a function that's about to be called, and it's going to return a user variable. And then it's just going to turn that into a dictionary and return the value. And so what's really helpful is we can look up here at our toolbar, and we can decide if we don't need to go into the details of that particular function, we can step over it or use our F10 key. It may be different on your Mac, but we can step over that function and just see what the result is. This is helpful if we have lots of complex code and we just want to kind of step through and look at the variables and the outcomes as they come along. One other thing that's really helpful is the next button on here, and that looks like an arrow with a small dot at the bottom. That's our step into function, or F11. That says go into the function call and start tracing line by line when we get into that function. And so we're going to hit the step into button. Notice that we've now jumped over to the services.py file, and we are at the very first line in the get user by ID. If we go back to our development console over here, we can see that we're getting all of the debug actions. We can also, if we'd like, we can interact with our program right here. So all the things that we can do in Python, typically we can do right here in this debugger command line console. So we can do something like print user ID. And you'll notice that we get 17. So this saves us from having to, for instance, if we want to interact with our object or kind of see some of the properties of our object, we don't have to kind of dig into it a whole lot. Next, we may want to execute one line at a time, and I would suggest that we know that the get database connection command is working, so we're going to step over that function. That means we're not going to go in and see how it works. We're just going to go ahead and let it execute. And when we execute that, we see that the connection variable actually now exists. It says, we've got a few properties here we can see. We get in our local variables. We notice it's a SQLite3.connection object. That's what we're looking for. And then we can go on and execute one line at a time. Notice our query is set up and looks like our query. Here's a really useful situation, right? Our query, if we've got multiple lines, sometimes it gets kind of confusing when we start adding things together in our queries. They get a little complex and we don't know exactly what the whole query statement really is. In this case, it's all on one line, so that's fine. We're going to go ahead and see that we've got that our query is actually select user ID, username from, etc. We're going to go ahead and execute our query. Looks like our query executed, and fetch all. So it looks like we've got a list of row objects in our users, right? And it looks like we have one object. We can also get that by doing, remember, we can interact here. We can print the length of users, and we can see that we have exactly one user. a nice way to kind of interact with our program in C. And we can even get the first user in the list, right? Because it's just a list. So we can do users 0. We can see we have a row object. We can do the first item in list 0. And we see that that's the user ID of 17, Leah Organa, which is what we expected, Leah Organa. And so on and so forth. It kind of lets us take a look at specific aspects to make sure we got the exact user we're looking for. And we're going to go back to our window here. We're going to step out of this function. So in other words, we're going to move on into the next line of code. And so what we expect now is that user, although it doesn't have a value right now, right? User is not defined. Once we finish executing this function, now user is defined. And if we want to see what the user is, we can click in here and see. We've got a date joined, an email, an ID, a username, and the user ID is another variable. And so it kind of just helps us to figure out exactly what it is that we were expecting to get out of this function. We can go ahead and step again, and we're going to turn that into something, the user to dictionary. Remember now, this user to dictionary, we can, because it's a function, we can actually step into it and see what is being returned here. And if we step one line at a time, we can see that our dictionary is being created, and we can see the values at each point in that dictionary, so we know what should be returned. Return, and there we go. And that's exactly what we expected, the organ. Once we've we're done testing that particular aspect or that particular breakpoint, we can let the application continue. We can try another user. Notice we took off our breakpoints, so no longer kind of holding there. Let's try one more. Let's go ahead and get the user's ratings. So we're going to set a breakpoint and get users' ratings. And we know that we have to do users and then ratings. And so we jump in there. Again, we can step into the user's rating function. We get our database connection back from our database. And if we stepped into that, we can actually see what is our database path. This is a handy one, right? Sometimes it's difficult to tell in this particular case, like there's a lot of stuff going on in this one particular line of code, for instance, right? Like what is our database path actually? Because when it tells us that we're failing to connect to our database, for instance, we don't actually know. We've got lots of parts here and we have no idea exactly what they are. So we can kind of break it down little by little. We can say, okay, what's the file? And it gives us the file. And then we can say, we can highlight the path of the file. And that shows us that it's a Windows path object. And this is the path to it. And then we can say, what is parents 1? We asked for parents 1 of that file. Oh, it tells us we're going to go up one directory. So we're going to go up into ISIS 58603 movie ratings. Notice this is up one folder from the API folder. So that's what this is telling us here. So we've looked at the first kind of parts. We've broken this string down into kind of its own constituent parts that are all being made together. And what does it mean when we add /data? So we can go back here and we can do exactly what we were looking for. And now we see that the Windows path we're going for is d:/ISIS 58603 movie rating /data. And if we click to the next line, so we're going to go ahead and step over this line. In other words, we're not going to bother to go into all the details of that line. We're just going to go to the next line. We can hover over and we can see now our database path is a Windows path, and there's a whole bunch of stuff here. But what we really want to know is what is our Windows path? And we can see here that our database path, again, back down here in the debug console, we can put up our database path and we can see that it's a Windows path, and here's the directory it's going to. And so when we connect to database path / movie data, again, we can try this, right? And see exactly what it is without having to change our code or put a print statement in there, for instance. We can see that we are movie data, movie data.db. And so if we go look in our Explorer and we look up our data folder, we can see, if we hover over this, notice d:/ISIS 58603 movie ratings data movie data.db. Therefore, we know we're going to connect to the correct movie data. This really kind of helps us to ensure that we've got it just right. All right, we're going to go ahead and continue on in this function. Again, we're going to select some user ratings. We're going to execute it and return our ratings. Now, let's take a look at our ratings. Make sure we've got a couple of ratings. Here we do. Looks like we have 2 ratings. We can again go back to our debug console and type length of ratings. And we can see that we have 2 ratings. A really great way to kind of just check out our code, see exactly what's happening, make sure that it is what we expect it to do. We're going to F10, close the connection, and then we're going to call a function and return the value of that function. So if we want, again, one more time, we can either just step over it and assume that that function works, or if we need to make sure that the function works, we can step into it using F11, or this downward arrow with a dot on the end of it. And once we step in here, we can see exactly what's happening. We're building a new rating. For each rating, we can see all of the settings as we call that initialization function. And once we have the ratings, we can append them all. No more ratings, and we can return our list of ratings. Now we should have a list of rating objects, which we see here back in our lookup ratings for user function. And we can convert those ratings to a list by using our rating objects, converting them to a dictionary, and moving on. Now, we may be past the point that we want to pay any more attention, so we can do one of 2 things. We can go ahead and hit the continue button, which just says, go ahead and continue running our program. Don't bother to stop anymore. We don't want to step through every line of code until we're done. Or we can say, we're done. We can just stop running the program at this point and not actually return anything. A third thing we can do is, let's say we decided that this isn't exactly what we were looking for, but we wanted to not just take the ratings list, but create a new kind of a new object, a new dictionary. And so ratings dictionary, and we want to provide the user ID and the ratings, right? So that we have the ratings in a ratings list and the dictionary. Well, the problem is we've just put in code after we started debugging, and so that's not going to help us very much. What we need to do at this point is we can restart the debugger by hitting Control-Shift F5, and that says go ahead and just restart the program from this point. It's the same thing as if we were to stop and start. So we'll hit the restart button. Restart is also useful for, say, if we go a little bit past where we expected this to go to. Let's go to our terminal. We see that we're back running again. Maybe we didn't. Also, we forgot to return our ratings dictionary. Okay, and again, now we have an error because we tried to change our code. And so what we're going to do is we want to go ahead and restart one more time. And so if we accidentally F10 past where we were looking for a few times, that becomes an issue, and we want to make sure to go back and restart again, go back kind of up the stack a little bit. And now we notice that we've changed the outputs that when user IDs are collected, we include the user ID and the ratings associated with the user ID that was requested. Might be a handy feature for someone wanting to use our program. But anyway, this gives us a good sense of kind of where things are at, and allows us to walk through them little bit by little bit, just ensuring that we can kind of see how our code is working and make sure that it's working the way we expect. Hope that's helpful.